Hi everyone, I'm Noah. Welcome to the first Get Together workshop, and I'll be introducing databases. So, how this workshop and the other workshops are going to work is just gonna give a very like surface level introduction to what we're talking about. In this case, it's databases, could be Flask in the future, Git, and introduce you to some resources. And in the case of databases and Flask, we'll also have some skeleton code which you can use and build off of in your projects. So the skeleton code should be linked in the description of the video. So, what is a database? So, imagine at this current state, you have a website with some HTML files, some CSS, so you have a pretty looking front end. You have a server that's running in the background and handling some API requests. But you need to store your data somewhere. So, if you look at the skeleton code, we have kind of the situation here. So ignore app two. App two is going to be our final app with our connection to the database. But we have some login HTML. We have a page that's meant to be secret. You're meant to sign in. And we have a basic Flask app. Um, and currently, we're storing our users in a dictionary, so we don't want to do this because if we have some sort of issue with our Flask app or it crashes, then all of our information gets lost. And it's also super unsecure. So how are we going to store our users' data? So a great way to do that is through a database. So let's also just see what this app looks like right now. So this is what our app looks like. We have a login page, a sign up page, but we don't really have a place to store that kind of information permanently. So that's where the database fits in. So the database that we're going to be using for our purposes is going to be Postgres. It's going to be storing data in tables. So the way that Postgres and other SQL database systems work is that data is stored in tables, which you can kind of think of as different uses for the data. So like if you imagine like a employee like customer relations app, you would need a table to store your employee data where you usually have something called a primary key to just like uniquely identify an employee compared to the other ones. You would have maybe a call or a transaction table, which has a unique transaction ID and references the employee ID as a foreign key. So here's an example of a table. You have the like a user ID, an email, maybe more information like their name, age, maybe a hash version of their password, which we'll talk about later. But the basic thing you need to know is in SQL languages, SQL databases, data is stored in these kind of tables like this. And you might see this if you've done like an intro to stats class, or like a machine learning class. These would be stored in like a CSV. Postgres SQL. SQL is stands or SQL stands for Structured Query Language. So it's the language we use to create, manage tables. So we have the tables here. You need to create it in the first place. You also need to create the database. Then you need to create the table. Maybe you create a schema like this. Now you have to create it. And then when you have to add, so for example, a user on your app creates a new account, you have to add a new record to your table. So that's kind of the relationship there. So how we do all that is through a language called SQL, which is pretty similar, but there's a few differences between something like Postgres SQL or MySQL or MySQL. So Postgres in particular, it's one of the relational database systems. There are many types, like MySQL, and it runs separately in the background of whatever machine you're on. and waits for connection requests. So we can actually in a couple seconds, I'm gonna show how you can connect to the Postgres database system and start making tables and having fun there. So as we showed earlier, what we have now is some login sign-up forms and a Flask backend, but our current way of storing the users is really bad, and we want to get to this point where we have some sort of database and we're able to make some SQL, send some SQL code to our database system. So what we need to do, first we need to store the password safely. It's, as we saw earlier, it's good practice to apply some sort of hashing algorithm so you can't just see people's passwords blatantly in the system. That's kind of unethical for you to be looking at that. So we would apply some sort of salt. We would add some kind of text to the password, run some sort of hashing algorithm, and then store that along with the salt inside of the database. So then we need to create a new database for our app. We need to create the necessary tables, and then we need to set up the SQL connection with our backend and start creating our queries that we want in relation to like the API call. So, for example, like when I someone logs in, I want to query the database to look for to get the passwords where the email matches the email that they put into the system, and I just want to check if the password is correct. And when I sign in, I don't just want to query the database, I actually want to uh, alter the database. I want to add a record. So we're going to need to define that too. So let's talk about our salt and hash system. So if you look at app2.py, this is your skeleton code that you could use for your Flask backend. Um, so we have these two libraries. So this one is going to be used for our hashing algorithm. This gives us a hashing algorithm, and this one is what we use to convert our salt into a human readable format, into a ASCII format. So when someone signs up, we want to create a salt and then we want to store that, and then we want to add that to our password, and then hash it using our hash password. And hash password is defined down here, and it uses the library that we imported at the top. So it uses the SHA-256 hashing algorithm. So we append the salt to our password and then hash it. And to get the salt in the first place, we have another function called gensalt, which uses us to randomly make a string of bytes and then use binASCII in order to put it into a human readable format. So we have that. We're going to hash the password and we're going to store the salt and the hash in our database. And we're going to show how to do that in a bit. So then after that, when you can see that in signup, ignore the current. I'll explain all this stuff in a bit, but just focus on the salt. So we create the salt and then we insert it into our database. And then when we log in, we're going to get the salt back, use the salt to hash the password again, uh, and then check if it's the password that is stored in the database. The password, by the way, is the one that the user puts in from um, like on the website. So that we're just going to hash it again to compare it to the one in our database. So I already talked about the why. So okay, let's get started with some Postgres. So we talked about the salt and the hashing of your password. So now we actually need a database. Um, So in order to get started, first you need to install Postgres. So if you don't have Postgres installed already, you can click on this link and click on whichever one is appropriate for you. But your system may already have Postgres. So if you go to your terminal and do something like which PSQL, you should be able to see something here that indicates that you have Postgres installed. Now, also, once you have Postgres installed, it's going to be on and listening for requests. So in order to connect to Postgres, just do PSQL Postgres, and now we're in our system, our database management system. So we also do that here in the code. We'll talk about a little bit about this later, but this is also Flask connecting to Postgres, which is listening. But when I do it on my machine, it looks like this. Now we can start running some commands. So before I start doing anything, I want to point out that in our skeleton code, we included a resource.md. And if you copy paste this website, you can actually see like a list of the commands that you could run in Postgres. And what's also neat is if you go to database operations, you can see a little bit of the stuff that we'll be doing later on, like the SQL commands on creating a database. Yeah, when you're here, selecting where is a really good resource if you're trying to do some more stuff with SQL. So let's create a database. So first thing, let's see what the databases that are in our table. So if you do \L, you'll see a list of the databases. So I have some where I was testing as some from previous projects. And if you want to see like the owner is Noli, so like if you want to see who you're logged in as, you can do /connect info. And now we want to create a database. So how do we do that? If we go here, I want to create a database. So let's create database DB name. So create database, and I'm gonna call it get together semicolon. So every PSQL command you're gonna have to end it with a semicolon. So now the database is connected. If I do \L again, I'll see we have a new database called GetTogether.db. And now that I created the database, you actually need to go into the database. So to connect to the database, you have to do \C, then get together DB. So now I'm connected to the database and I can start doing some queries. So let's see what tables I have. So if I do \DT, that's how you see the tables that you have in your database. So we don't have any tables yet. So right now we're dealing with an um, empty database. So we're gonna have to create a table. So we connected to Postgres, but we need to start making our table. So let's get started with that. So now that we're in our database, let's keep going. We need to design our database. So it's good before you even start doing commands in PSQL to just maybe sketch out what your database schema is going to look like. So I'm going to be using this users table. We can also create this transactions table, but for the sake of my app, I only have a user, their email, their password, and I don't really care about anything else because all I really need is these information to log them in and sign up. Um, but if I do need more information, like their name, their age, stuff like that, I might add that to the users table. If I if I was maybe like doing an e-commerce app, I would maybe have a transactions table and relate them uh, with like re by putting the user ID as a foreign key. But let's move forward with this users table. And when you're making your app, you should do something like this as well. Okay, so now that I have um, the schema for my table, I'm gonna have to put a SQL command in order to create it because right now I'm dealing with an empty database. So what I have to do now, in order to make a table, you have to use create table. Now you're gonna want to put the name of the table. So I'm gonna call it users, and then go to a new line, and now you can start specifying the fields in your table. So these are the fields. These are going to be the columns of our table. So if you look over here, the fields would be ID, email, name, age, and password. So these are going to be the columns. And then we also need to specify some attributes like what type of data are we going to expect? Is it a primary key? Does it have to be unique? Does it have to have something there? Like we probably would not want to accept a user that does not have an email or a password. So let's start defining our fields. So I'll go with ID, serial. So this will just increment by one uh, for each of the users. So we don't have to worry about like inputting an ID when we're making a new user. The database management system, Postgres will manage it for us. Then we're going to specify we want this as a primary key. And then we'll go to our next field. So I'm going to put email varchar 255. So this is specifying that the max length of the email that I'm going to accept is going to be 255 characters long. I want each email to be unique, and I want there to be some value there. Then I'm going to put a password hash. So I want to store the hashes of the passwords. And then I want to make sure that there's at least something there. And then I'm gonna also store the salt of my password, which should be about 32 uh, bytes long. And then I'm going to close and finish the query with a semicolon. Okay, so here I forgot to specify a type for my pass hash, so I'll put text. And I also want to specify I do not want an empty salt. This should work. Okay, so now we have our table. So if we do DT again, now we should see we have a users table. And let's see if we have any records in our table. So do we have any data in it? So we can do that with select star from star would say just give me all the give me all of the fields from let's do yeah, the name of the table was users, so we have nothing in there. So what if we want to start putting some data in there? So let's say I'm going to do insert into users, and then we need to specify the data, the fields that we're going to insert into. So I'm going to say, I want to give you the information for email, path hash, and salt. And then I'm going to say values. And this is where we put the detail, like the values for each of those. So since we have ID serial, we should be able to get away with this. Um, we'll see. So let's say example at email.com. I'm going to put some pass hash there. So I don't know, something like that. And then salt, I don't know, it should be some um, small string. So boom, we just inserted a record into our table. So let's see now if we query the table for everything that it has, we'll see we have a bit of data in our database now. So even if I quit this connection and I come back and I connect back to the database and I query it again, it will stay there. So that's the cool thing is like this will stay there. Our database, the data in our database will persist, which is nice. So now we have our database. This Postgres is running. It's on my computer. It's running in the background. I have a database on my machine. Now I also have a Flask application running on my machine. I want to connect my Flask application to this Postgres database. So let's do that. Okay, so now we want to connect to our database from our Flask backend. So we're going to use that using what's called an adapter. So Python and Flask cannot just natively talk to Postgres. So we're going to use a library called psychopg2 in order to connect it to our app. And then once we have that connection, we're going to set up what's called a cursor. And it is the cursor that's going to be sending and managing the the SQL queries that we send to Postgres. So we see that here. Well, first of all, along with Flask, you're going to have to install the module. So we have that in the requirements.txt. Import the module at the top, and right at the top, we're going to connect to our database. So ensure whatever database that you called it, that you put it here. So we called it GitTogether.db. We made it. I'm signing in as myself. Um, I checked the port, and this is the port that Postgres is listening out of. And since the database is on my machine, I'm just going to say localhost. So once we have that connection, we're going to set up a cursor, and this is what we're going to use to execute our SQL queries. And we went through it already. Like we have our insert into, this is how we're going to uh, add a new row to our database. So this is how you do it in Python. You can use these %s to put these into your SQL instructions. You want to have your cursor like at the start of your app's initialization, set up that connection, set up your cursor, and then you guys can go through this code. We already went through it a little bit, but yeah. Okay, so I also wanted to show what happens after this. So we have our connection, it's connected to GetTogetherDB. We have all of this code, which we are sure is correct. So let's actually test it. If we run Python 3 app2, okay, so let's try signing in. So I'm going to sign in with my email, super secure password, and it correctly identifies, okay, I do not have that in our database. Um, so let's see. I'm going to sign up. I'm going to put a really secure password, and boom. So I get sent to the secret page, but let's see if that's actually in our database. So let's go terminal, select from users, and now you see we have a brand new email here, a password hash. So you can't tell what I just put in, and this salt, which you append onto my password and then hash it. So if I go back, and so actually let's shut down the server first. I'll close the server, I'll bring it back up again. So if I go to here and I go and I try to do the same password as before, you can see now the Flask application sends a query to the database, says I have the correct password, and sends me through. So let's try I send the wrong password and it does not let me through. So that's cool. That's a way to check on your end, like on from the terminal, like what's going on with my databases, and just a check to make sure that what we did in our app2 is really working. Another resource I would point you guys to is LeetCode. So they actually have uh, a ton of questions on databases as well. Some of them are locked behind, but I would definitely recommend doing some of the easy ones to get a hang of like what kind of how it is to, like what kind of SQL queries can you do? How do tables interact? Like it's a really great resource to practice. Um, I know it says MySQL, but oh, you can do Postgres SQL as well. So yeah, there's a good resource to practice as well, and make sure to look at the website to see like what kind of stuff you can do. There's a lot of stuff here, which is really helpful. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to check out the skeleton code. I hope that was a good introduction to, how to like what are databases, what's Postgres, and how to debug and connect it to your Flask application.